Welcome to Top 10 JonBenet Suspects on New Year's Eve. So these are the 10 most likely suspects, excluding the Ramseys. So let the countdown begin. Number 10.
Randall Simmons.
Little JonBenet Ramsey's photographer started working for the Ramseys on June 5th, 1996, about 6 months prior to her murder. And he graduated from high school in 1971. He worked as a photojournalist in his early years, and then he opened his own studio and did photography for different people. And then he went into children's photography, and that is where he met Pamela Griffin and her daughter Christine. And he took photographs of her when she was 6 years old. And then later, Pam Griffin recommended Randall Simmons to Patsy to take JonBenet's photographs. And in 1991, he was arrested for assault, and he served 10 months in jail and was put on probation. Sometime after JonBenet's murder, he was arrested for indecent exposure. He was walking around naked in this little town about 2 hours away from Boulder. And then in 2019, when he was living in Oregon, he was arrested again for child pornography. He had pictures of underage girls on his computer. And the reason that he was caught is he went to a public restaurant or some kind of possibly a fast food place and used their Wi-Fi internet. And somehow they found out and reported him. Number 9.
James Michael Thompson.
Now there's only 2 things that make this man suspicious. One, the first, is he tried to burn down the Ramseys' house. He took some papers and he lit them on fire and he stuffed them in the Ramseys' mail slot. And they burned a little bit of the house, but it went out. And then the second thing that he did was he was working for a ambulance company. Well, I guess it's not an ambulance, it's where they pick up dead bodies. And after JonBenet had died, he went back into the books and he tore out the page that JonBenet was listed in. So I have never really investigated this man or made a video about him. So that might be a future video. Number 8.
Bill and Janet McReynolds.
He was 66 years old at the time of JonBenet's death, and he played Santa Claus. And so it seems hard to believe that he could fit his way through that window well and into the house. But then again, he was Santa Claus. The thing that's suspicious about him was 22 years before JonBenet's murder, his daughter was abducted and her friend, and she was assaulted, and his daughter witnessed the assault. And maybe this disturbed him and he acted out against JonBenet. And another thing that's odd about Bill and Janet is Janet wrote a play about a young girl being assaulted and murdered in her basement. So that's suspicious about them. Number 7.
Stephen Kobby.
The strange man that lived at 738 14th Street, the back alley neighbor of John Ramsey. His children, the youngest, Eben, around Burke's age, was playing over at the Ramsey house on Christmas Day, and therefore Stephen probably knew that the Ramseys were going to be out that night and be gone the following day, December 26th. Did he enter the Ramsey's house that night to kidnap JonBenet, and he ultimately killed her? Number 6.
Jeff Merrick.
He was a friend of John Ramsey's from the early 1970s, and John helped him get a job with Access Graphics in 1994, or around 1994. But John's father-in-law, Patsy's father, fired him from Access Graphics. And so he had moved to Boulder, and he talked to John Ramsey to try to get his job back, and John would not do anything for him. And so he had a grudge against John. Number 5.
John Fernie.
John Fernie was a friend of the Ramseys, and he lived about 10 miles south of them. And they were supposed to deliver, the Ramseys, a gift to John and Barbara that night, but supposedly decided not to go there and deliver that gift. And suspicion on him is that after the Ramseys called 911, they called Barbara and John Fernie. And John Fernie was there almost as fast as the police had arrived there. He was the first one there. Supposedly, he was the first one there. But I did a video about this. It seems like he got there faster than what is possible. And so there's a lot of suspicion about him. Oh yeah, and also he came to the back and came to that glass door and said he saw the ransom note there and was able to read it through the glass door. And then he came around to the front. So that's awfully suspicious also. Number 4.
Cliff Castone.
Now, Cliff Castone worked at BMW Monterey in Seaside, California, and he lived in Salinas, California at the time of JonBenet's murder. And he was engaged, or the boyfriend of Allison Shoney, Priscilla White's sister, and he was staying at their house that Christmas. And he attended the Ramsey's Christmas party on December 23rd, and he was there at Fleet White's house when they had the Christmas dinner. And in fact, when Patsy called that morning to talk to Priscilla, he answered the telephone and handed it off to Priscilla so Patsy could talk to her. And he's a Vietnam vet and flew helicopters, and so doesn't that make him suspicious? Number 3,
Fleet White.
Now, I don't know how many people out there know this, but John and Patsy Ramsey moved to Boulder in 1991. And it wasn't until 1994 that Fleet White moved to Boulder. And they lived 2 houses south of John Ramsey. And so they were friends, and Fleet White would drive in that back alley. And then, at the time of JonBenet's murder, Fleet and Priscilla had moved a mile away. Now, Fleet is the one who made that 911 call at the Ramsey's Christmas party on December 23rd. And Fleet and John Ramsey's friendship broke up after her murder. And Patsy and John testified to the police about Fleet having 2 big incidences of him losing control and being almost manic. The first was when they were in Atlanta and they were going to go to JonBenet's funeral. Fleet refused to stay with Rod Westmoreland. And then he went over to Jeff Ramsey's house, John's brother, and got in a fight with him, and then went over to the Ramsey's place at Patsy's father and mother's house, and he got in a verbal fight with John Ramsey about how John was acting. And then when the Ramseys went back to Boulder, Fleet arrived at their church unannounced and spoke to the secretary, and then barged in on John and Patsy when they were talking to Father Roll, and got in a verbal fight with John about reporters coming to Fleet's house and suspicion falling on Fleet. And Fleet is kind of the only male that could actually go into the Ramsey's house that night without JonBenet being upset or startled and getting away with his crime. Number 2,
Glenn Meyer.
He was an uninvited guest to the December 23rd Christmas party by the Ramseys. He came in the middle and asked to speak with Joe Barnhill. He lived at the Barnhill residence in their basement, and he would have been privy to know that the Ramseys were leaving on December 26th and that their dog would not be there because it would be over at the Barnhill residence. You probably know that Patsy's handwriting was checked several times, but did you know whose handwriting was checked a second and possibly a third time? That was Glenn Meyer's handwriting, because the first time his handwriting looked very similar to the ransom note's handwriting. Number 1.
Linda Hoffman.
No one would know more about the Ramsey family than Linda Hoffman, and she was having money troubles, and before she asked for a loan from Patsy, her sister, who was renting to Linda, threatened to kick her out of her house. So the theory is one of Linda's sister's husbands was the one that went over that night for a possible ransom that got messed up, and he killed JonBenet. And so she's number one because of the financial difficulties that she was experiencing and the knowledge that she had of the Ramsey family and the house and all those things and all that. Well, this ends this episode of Unsolved, and I've covered the majority of these suspects and gone into great detail in other videos, so you might want to check those out. And for the few that I have not, I will create videos to go into detail about those suspects. So I'll see you the next time.